Hello, everyone who's here now. Hopefully we'll have more people joining in as we go along. Welcome to this last event in the series of online events that are all kind of tied to Open 2021, which is a graduating students annual exhibition at the University School of Architecture and Cities, University of Westminster. My name is Mirna Pedal, as you can see on that banner, and I am a studio curator at the School of Architecture and Cities, and I'm also face behind Open Studio Westminster, so I run kind of the website and the adjoining social media platforms. So I'm delighted to have Hamza with us today, our relatively recent graduate, just last year's graduate from the School of Architecture and Cities. And this event has been primarily envisaged as kind of Hamza's conversation with you guys, with the audience. And although I'm a host and I might be kind of like, jumping in and asking a question or two, the idea is that kind of the engagement is between all of you, because the university really wants to sort of, get your views and your thoughts on this, as Hamza said, very controversial, burning issue, because it's become very obvious that, considering the current situation that we're in, and this has been an ongoing conversation for many years now, but, it has been sort of accelerated both with the COVID crisis, with the kind of the climate change, all of these kind of big issues, like what does it mean? What is it going to mean to be an architect? And how does the architectural education need to adapt to that? How do we produce architects for the future, basically? So I'm sure that most of you are already super familiar with Hamza's work, but I still will take a second to kind of properly introduce him. So Hamza Shaikh is currently a Part 2 architectural assistant and partner at Make Architects in London. He is also the founder and the host of the Two World Design podcast series, which explores the hidden potential of architecture by speaking with leading practitioners, both within and outside of the field. In 2020, he co-founded the MAD Collective, which held multiple symposia to highlight broad issues within the field of architecture and higher education. He also shares experimental drawing techniques on his popular Instagram page, and Hamza Shaikh Design, as you just saw. And more broadly, he shares architectural guidance on his fast-growing YouTube channel, and I know that majority of you are actually joining via his YouTube channel, so you'd know where to find him. And he has also been described as an architectural influencer on social media. Now, from my conversations with Hamza, I know this is not all. He's got many more things in works at the moment, but we're not going to talk about those all in good time. I'm sure we will be disclosing this. And I'm also hoping that this is, this might be the first one, but hopefully not the last conversation we at the School of Architecture and Cities have with Hamza. So hopefully, there will be kind of, this will open up more room for future collaboration. And so in terms of today's kind of schedule, so to speak, we will kick off with a short film about Hamza's journey into architecture and through the world of architecture, which will then be followed by a presentation and a discussion. So thank you for being here. Enjoy the event, and Hamza, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mirna. It's a really nice intro, and I think it's really brave of Westminster to take on a topic like this, because, to ask the question, does university prepare you for practice, is, some people would look at that as a bit of a shot in the foot, because it seems like the general feeling around architecture university right now is somewhat of a negative one. But I think, some of the internal discussions we were having, Mirna, what it shows is that universities, and particularly University of Westminster, are open to see where issues are, to see where they can improve, and it's always this open space for change and everyone's opinions. So I'm so happy that this conversation is happening. I'm so happy that it's happening in this way. I would prefer it if it was, done physically, because you can gauge a lot from the audience and you can sense that. But this is the next best thing, and hopefully we're going to have a we're going to have a good session. So as Myrna said, I'll be playing a video just now. Guys, I'm really curious to see where you guys are coming from and where you're tuning in from, what stage you're at as well. So make sure you leave a comment. Zainab joined us. She's studying Bachelor of Science Architecture Technology at Westminster. Good to have you, Zainab. Habib Najib is feeling very hot, it seems. Good to see you, man. And yeah, I'm glad to see all these people here. Please leave a message. Let us know where you're tuning in from and whether you're starting at Westminster or elsewhere. Okay, so with this video that's going to come up soon, it's about 8 minutes. It will go through my journey. Instead of me trying to explain it with words and like stutters, this video is a bit more polished. You may have seen it already on my channel, but maybe you can just kind of get more information from it now. Hopefully you'll just get an understanding of my perspective and why my views are the way they are. But just so you know, my presentation that will follow the video is about talking not just about my experience, but at the end of the presentation, I'm going to be showing what I think everyone else is thinking. And I think my position on social media and blah, 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 and all these other amazing people here who I'm connected with and what they're doing, I'm using stuff they've done. I'm just trying to show the overall kind of feeling in the architectural field right now from students and professionals. Good to have you, Thuto. Hope I'm saying your name right, from South Africa. Cool. All right. So I think we're ready to get the video going. Yeah. Video is part of the University of Westminster Open 2021 event, where we're going to be discussing the big, controversial and difficult question in our field currently, which is, does Architecture University prepare you for practice? In order to shed light on this and to share my perspective, here's my journey. I knew from an early age that I was not able to learn in the traditional way schools taught us. I was much more in tune with the creative subjects and learning. The art studio was where I felt I belonged. In fact, I used to get detention so often that they just used to let me serve my time in the art studio. My art teacher knew I was a mischievous boy and used to regularly get annoyed at me when she saw my work because she wanted me to apply myself in the same way to other subjects. I was one of the very few students to get 100% in my art GCSEs, but it was the way my art teachers believed in me that truly gave me confidence. It made me think I could maybe keep going with this education thing. But into my A-levels, I was still almost failing all my other subjects out of sheer demotivation. But my art teacher managed to convince me to go for a foundation art course in Canterbury, because no other uni would have taken me. I went reluctantly, but once I got there, I loved it. I could just draw, paint, make models, create graphics, and I could thrive creatively, and I was surrounded by similar people. Why couldn't I be taught in the same way at school, I wondered. I started to realize, however, that artistic professions didn't have good career prospects, generally speaking, so I started to think about how I could create a business or brand that could eventually bring in decent money. So I started a clothing line. I called it Two Worlds Design because I always felt that I was living in two worlds. As a child, I struggled to understand my identity, balancing two distinctly different cultures. As a teen, I felt the need to be spiritual, which conflicted with my urge to be a bit wild and rebellious. And so I dealt with these dualities my whole life, and I wanted a way to express it. The business kicked off as I designed many different t-shirts and got my DJ friends to market it at various music events. There was a bit of a hype, and I got my first taste of design as a business. Thanks to my foundation course, I was then able to enroll directly into the Canterbury School of Architecture at the University for the Creative Arts. But throughout my first year, I was more focused on the brand and the business and partying than the course itself. This frustrated my tutor, and I ended up failing a few modules that almost didn't get me into second year. At this point, I had to reevaluate. I wanted to keep building my brand, but I also started to really love architecture, so I rebranded.
I applied the same design ethos of two worlds to my architectural thinking, which worked a treat because architecture was fundamentally concerned with two worlds: the outer world of buildings and material, as well as the inner world of psychology and experience. The spiritual and sacred aspect also fitted in perfectly with architecture. But I wondered to myself, how was I meant to promote, build, and maintain this brand while staying focused with my studies? That's when I discovered the currency of architecture: drawing. And I rediscovered my passion for art. I started uploading all of my drawings and conceptual designs onto Instagram, and it started to get noticed. Big pages started sharing and featuring my work, and I started to grow a following. My passion and desire was burning strong, and I managed to finish my bachelor's degree with first-class honours, which felt alien to me. But it was a sign to me that I was on the right track. Then this weird thing happened. I was thrown into architectural practice. It felt detached from what I was doing at university. And being at a very small firm, I was given a lot of responsibility. But being who I am and knowing that I wanted to take this field seriously, I knuckled down and worked as hard as I could. Amazing things happened at this tiny firm. We got incredible projects for our size, and I was given leading responsibilities on a few contemporary barn conversion projects. One of them was even picked up by Grand Designs. And so with this vital experience, I went back into university for my master's. But I had a yearning to know more about practice. That's when the Two Worlds Design podcast was born. I discovered so many outstanding and reputable tutors at the University of Westminster that my first several episodes materialized very quickly. I even used the university's professional recording studios in Harrow to film and record all on my own. And it was bloody hard to balance all of that with my master's. But I'm glad I made the most of all of the facilities I had around me. I spoke to remarkable practitioners in the field and outside of the field. And after many episodes speaking to various leading professionals, I started to realize something profound. And that was that the field of architecture was rapidly evolving. Our roles as architects was changing. I also discovered that we are far more capable than just limiting ourselves to designing buildings, and that this was starting to be reflected in practices across the world, especially after the pandemic hit. I had this powerful realization that maybe university was not preparing us for the jobs of today, but instead it was giving us the tool set and vision to create the roles of the future. And so I started my next job as a partner and part 2 architectural assistant at this incredible forward-thinking practice, which designed award-winning buildings and spaces at every scale, which had its own think tank and a completely flexible outlook and business model. And that brings me to where I am today, talking to you guys, trying to give you a bit more insight and share my crazy journey, which has been extremely difficult at times, but because of that has given me a perspective that maybe you could find useful, or maybe you could take value from. And right now, I kind of live in two worlds. I have a strong foot in the working world where I work a full-time job at this practice, and at the same time, I have multiple external endeavors where I'm working on publications, where I'm giving talks, where I'm regularly adding new content to my YouTube channel and podcast, all in the efforts to provide some sort of educational value and to maybe create a new role for myself in the future, maybe a new role for you guys. And so to go back to the question, which I haven't really answered, I don't think it's an easy question to answer. I think everyone should have their own view on it, but one thing I can say for sure is university did prepare me. It did give me the tool set to do things that other university courses or a more stringent and more constrained university course probably couldn't do. But that doesn't mean we can't improve our university system. And that is the conversation that needs to keep on going.
Awesome. All right. So that, I think that video is, I I think that video essentially makes me think about this in a bit more serious terms, in the sense that, like, my journey is specific to me, and I think that's why my presentation is going to be there's going to be a lot of importance given at the end to understanding what everyone else feels, and equally why this conversation is open to all of you guys, why the comments are open, why, you know, the discussion will hopefully stay on YouTube, because we want to keep figuring out what needs to happen. And I think the thing is, the reason changes don't happen in society is because people don't talk about them. So the more we talk about it, the longer we talk about it, the more things can happen successfully. So I think, as I said, the conversation needs to keep happening. And also, I didn't answer the question explicitly. I answered it a little bit to say, yeah, it kind of prepared me. But that video is essentially meant to show you that my trajectory has been quite a strange one, quite a unique one, in the sense that I could have actually put all my eggs in the university basket, but I decided to put my eggs in a few other places too. So to kind of give you a bit more background into, like, you know, some of the stuff I was focusing on, but also the main thing, the things I've learned, and to kind of, I think the most important thing is to convey my discoveries. I've got a presentation that I'll take you through with various tips and various, you know, insights that I've learned throughout my journey. So if we can get the presentation beamed, I will start. Okay, so I want to start the presentation by talking you through the drawings that you saw me kind of talk about in the video just now. So as I said, I started my drawing process quite early in architecture, and I was one of the, I think, the first wave of people to really take Instagram seriously within the architecture niche, which worked out to my favor, I think, because, you know, now Instagram is quite, I would say, is one of the most favored apps for architecture students to use for inspiration and resources. I think it's quite an important time for social media in architecture. So what I'll do is take you through the slides, and you'll basically get an idea of essentially all my learnings, and hopefully take some valuable insights for yourself. So this is something I strongly believe in. Drawing is the currency of ideas. Thinking through drawing is an architect's strongest way of communicating. So I was never super strong with drawing when I started, but this is something I really definitely realized. So here are some of the lessons I've learned, and I'll take you through some of the detailed drawings as well, so you can get an idea of actually how these drawings get put together. I'll be going through them quite quick, but I've numbered them. So if anyone has any specific questions on a slide or a drawing, take note of what number that was. And in the questions, if we get any later, I can talk about specific ones. Okay. So the first lesson I learned is your thoughts essentially turn into reality. And that is the university's aim. And that is what university is trying to instill within you. So I also always say to people that nobody is bad at drawing. Some people just communicate easier through it. So it really bugs me sometimes when people say, you know, I want to kickstart my drawing, you know, elevate my drawings, and I want to, you know, learn as much as I can, and I want to really accelerate my drawing learnings, but I'm just not good at drawing. I'm not good at it. And it really annoys me, because I don't know, I've never thought people could be, you know, crap at drawing. For me, drawing is much more of a truthful expression. It's just a type of communicative method. And my general feeling on it is some people just communicate easier. It doesn't make them a
Hi everyone. Sorry, I think we're having a bit of a technical issue from what I can hear. I think Hamza's probably his Wi-Fi got cut off, which is one of the usual things that seem to happen these days. So hopefully he will be back with us fairly soon. Let's see what's going on. Yeah, if anyone has any comments so far or would like to say something, we did post a little question for you guys if anyone's interested in throwing in a comment. Do you guys think that universities and architectural education have already started to integrate some changes, or they are still firmly stuck in the past? So if you have any thoughts while we're waiting for Hamza, maybe you can just kind of throw in a few comments, and Jack, who is helping us out with the technical stuff, will beam your answers and we can maybe have a short conversation. Thank you. Hamza's coming back.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I think my internet decided to bug out, so I'm on my hotspot now. Is it okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's fine. Yeah, it was just I just kind of jumped on for a second while you were out. So hopefully, but yeah, let's get back then to your presentation, and then we can take the questions later.
Cool. Sorry about that. All right, I'll carry on from here. Okay. So yeah, that's my first sort of learning. The next thing is essentially drawing is the prime method for communication in architecture, school, and practice. So another thing that really stood out to me in university is how important drawing is, and the reason drawing is so important is because it's essentially how we communicate our ideas, and that can be done in, as I said, in whatever way you think is best. And usually, if you're drawing, you don't necessarily need incredibly strong ways of illustrating. You don't need to be an illustrator to succeed in architecture school. You need to be confident enough to put pen to paper. So some crazy sketches, all collaged and messy, these things work really well in university. The numbering is all wrong. I'm sorry, guys. So the other thing is your ideas, your experiences, and your unique qualities as a person will eventually translate into your drawings. So the reason I'm putting so much emphasis on this drawing aspect is because, again, as I've already said, it's in university where you realize, and this is no surprise to anyone, we often ask, why the hell are we focusing solely on fantastical, crazy projects and drawing and visions and all these things? I started to realize, as you've seen in the previous slides, that there's a really important lesson to be learned in terms of why university prepares you to be a good at drawing, and why it really focuses, perhaps too much in some cases, on building your drawing skills. But these, for example, I think if you keep working on it and you keep thinking about how your identity and your personality starts to play into your drawings, then it starts to create quite a powerful outcome if you stick with it. The other thing is every thought can be translated into a drawing, and I often say that your thinking through drawing is essentially the ethos that I like to put on my Instagram page, because I put a lot of importance on this idea of, if you have a thought, you can easily translate that thought, or not easily, but if you really try, any thought can be translated into a drawing, and then any drawing can then be translated into something more tangible, like a model. So I'm going through these drawings quite quickly, but again, if anyone has any questions on the technical side of these drawings, just in the questions, leave a reference to what number you saw, even though the numbers are a bit dodgy. And then the interesting thing then about this process is the model. Every model essentially can be built. So when I go back to the previous slide of talking about thoughts turning into reality, hopefully you're seeing this process of, you start with something rough, you start to refine this idea, and then the idea starts to bring in some of your personality, and then you start to create something which tries to grasp on to your thoughts in a more tangible way, and then it can actually become something tangible and something physical. So this is the process that architecture school, from my experience, is really trying to hone down with you as a student. It's really trying to push this this way of thinking, and there's a big reason for it, I think, which applies into practice too. And so, you know, a drawing can also indicate movement, processes, ideas, instructions, statements, emotions, philosophies, stories. You know, I needn't go on, but the the opportunities you have in your drawings are endless. And I think one of the most important things that, you know, people underestimate sometimes and can easily say, oh, it's just some toxic culture of architecture school, is the focusing on sort of the composition or focusing on the aesthetics of things. But giving importance to composition is a very important critical skill to learn, in my opinion, because it really trains you as a designer to be able to look at something and give you a trained eye, and those skills are really important in practice too. So another skill, another lesson, shall I say, that I learned is to use what you've got, and you've got a lot. And what I mean by that is the resources that you have. So one of the big things that people say is copying and tracing are evil. And I'm here to say that copying, quote unquote copying, and tracing are not forbidden. Plagiarizing, on the other hand, is, and there's a big distinction to be made here. So copying and tracing are, in my opinion, things that need a lot of skill for you to do them well, and something you can learn to do. So, you know, I think of it in a way that, you know, tracing is like citing a quote or text in an essay. So, I mean, this is a drawing I haven't put out yet, but it's essentially, you know, there's a photograph of Big Ben, and I took that photograph and just drew over it, because, you know, if you think about the skills of that you're going to apply in university, and, you know, the idea of working smart as well, it doesn't make sense for you to, you know, just absolutely slave over a drawing that you could easily use smart working techniques to achieve that drawing, and then you could start to add your individual kind of flair to it and whatnot. And so I did this drawing of the Big Ben, just tracing a photograph, and then I started to add whatever unique features that I wanted to add. So this is another thing that I really learned about drawing. And another thing is, I would say, is angles, views, orientation, perspectives control the story. So this is another key thing that I learned from my university journey, and the importance of drawings. Every software has its own flavor. So whether you're using Revit or whether you're using Rhino or SketchUp, whatever you use, there is going to be a nuanced outcome to that. And that is something which is, you know, something you've got to be wary of in your drawing process. I would say you need to know many softwares, but you need to also make sure you master one or two. And university is I think, it's the perfect place for you to go through that explorative journey, take in as much as you can, try to learn as much as you can, and really, really grab skills that are going to be really important to you in the future. So one of the things I would say is learn as many softwares as you can, but focus on one or two. And whether that is, you know, Photoshop, even just master one or two, it will really help you to stand out. So Photoshop collaging is the fastest way to iterate digitally, is another thing I learned. So when you're thinking about these ideas and you're thinking about putting an idea out quickly, but you want to create some sort of tangible space, and, you know, you don't necessarily want to use a model, collaging is a very important skill. But at the same time, hand drawing is the most truthful. So never ever underestimate the power of your hand drawings. So if we go back to that original learning, use what you've got, and you've got a lot. References, photographs, thinking about where you can cite information from, using the model in creative ways, and using softwares and choosing the right software, and also remembering the importance of drawing. Apologies if you can hear any noise. I have a poorly boy in the background who, if I need to tend to, I will go. Another thing, another big lesson I learned is drawings never lie, but they can obscure the truth. So, you know, we're trained to draw fast in architecture school, and perhaps this is a criticism in needing to take the drawing journey a bit slower and to actually explicitly teach drawing. I think this is something that comes up quite often. But you know, there's a massively enlightening experience from just being able to spend a lot of time in on our drawings. Sorry, hold on one second.
Hello. Yeah, I guess Hamza has some minor either technical difficulties, or there is, as he said, he has a poorly boy that he takes care
sorry.
of. Okay, there we go.
We're back. So one of the things, as I said, is to be able to take this drawing process slow. And I think a lot of people look at these big standout showpiece drawings and they get very intimidated. And the truth of the matter is these drawings take weeks to do. People, you know, I spent, I think, 2 whole weeks, day in, day out, working on this particular drawing. And also some of these drawings here, for example, they took a lot of time. And you know, I always say that the details and the nuances sell the story and the context. So, you know, by really focusing on, you know, for example, the way this number plate looks, the hoarding on these signs, you know, the type of cranes used in this area, the telephone wires, all of these things will give a strong level of context to your drawing and really make your outcome, you know, even more effective. And this, again, this is something that I think university tries to instill within you. Another thing I learned is a drawing is never finished until it's finished. That might sound confusing, but I think what I mean by this is, you know, we've all heard the adage that a drawing is never finished, but I tested this and I think you can get to a point where a drawing is really finished. You know, I feel like if I added anything else to this, it would start to take away from the effect. And I think, again, this is something university tries to instill within you, which is what, you know, it tries to teach you this level of, you know, I think a level of intelligence with understanding composition, understanding design, understanding the sensitivities of architectural expression to a level where, you know, you need to be able to look at something and judge quite quickly, is this something that looks good or looks effective? Another thing, as I've said already, is you need to work smart. But a lot of people don't understand that you need to draw smart. And there's so many tips, you know, that I could say, you know, and I think, side note, if this is all a bit overwhelming, I apologize. I wanted to cram in as much valuable insights and tips as I could, and just explain again my value, why I value university education in this regard. And then we're going to talk about perhaps the things that university can improve on and the negative aspects in a second. So drawing smart, and again, you guys can check out the videos on my YouTube channel where I go into these things in more detail. And another thing that I learned is a good 3D model is the most useful tool for drawing. So it's going to be, it's a difficult thing to try and figure out when to do a good 3D model, but generally speaking, a 3D model, if you do it really well, it will be able to take your, you know, essentially give you a resource to create so many more drawings. But a good 3D model can also be a distraction. And, you know, this is something you will learn. A lot of you might already know when you start a project, you have the tendency to want to go straight into creating something, creating a tangible outcome. But you've got to really be able to learn this balance. And again, I think university is explicitly or implicitly trying to teach you these skills, which you could never give someone a quick course on how to learn to have intuitive eyes for certain things and intuitive kind of, you know, intuitive sense of how to treat design and how to look at design. 3D models can be quick and conceptual too. So it's not always that you have to create a really complex finalized model, but sometimes you can treat your models as as almost like a massing exercise, as we all know, but also you can take symbolic elements and construct things quickly just to give across a feeling and a message. A 3D model also doesn't have to be a 3D model. What I mean by that is you can take something and make it 3D. And this is again, one of the things I'm saying is this is not something university explicitly teaches you, but it implicitly teaches you this. You have to learn these instincts, and they take years and years to learn. To be able to say, okay, in this instance, we don't need to create a 3D model. We can go straight into doing something 2D to project the idea of three dimensionality. So another big learning is you can think and speak through drawing, as I've said. And I've heard some very respectable people say, Narinder Sagu, for example, the art director at Foster's and Partners, I was on a Clubhouse session with him, and he's an incredibly talented drawer, illustrator, architect. And he said that you would only, I think I'm paraphrasing, if I remember correctly, he said something like, you only should draw when you have something to say. And I think there's something incredibly important about that. But I've struggled to figure out whether I agree with this or not, because I think when it comes to composition and when it comes to the aesthetics of a drawing, you can sometimes feel the urge to just create without necessarily having something to say. And for example, this collage is, I had nothing really to say explicitly, but subliminally, maybe there are things going on, which is why I think he's a very wise person, and what he says is very wise. So this is something to keep in mind, and maybe leave your opinion of what you think about this. But how do you speak and how do you say stuff? Well, you have to speak through your lines, you have to speak through your colors, and you have to speak through symbols. And your architectural drawing is a way of communicating in a way that your words might not be able to communicate. Again, something you will learn after years of being in the design environment. And as I think, aesthetics are important, and this is something university will also try to prepare you for. Now, this adage everyone knows, less is more, but I think less is more if what you have to say is significant. So when it comes to a drawing, if you're trying to say something deeply within it, or in the undertones of a drawing, then I think having a less is more philosophy around your drawing is quite useful, because it essentially prompts the viewer or the audience to fill in the gaps, and therefore there is less need to kind of make a statement. But your thoughts are connected, and therefore your drawings are connected. So another thing about recording the process and kind of recording every thought you have as a drawing is eventually you can look back at your sketchbook, you can look back at your portfolio or all of your archive of work. And this is, I think, a very useful tip for people starting university, is you'll then be able to have a visual documentation of all of your work, and you can put it together in these really unique ways that show, again, how would I describe this drawing? It's a representation of my design ideas and thinking for the last 7 years. There's no way I could describe this in one word. Sorry, in words. This is something that when you look at, you can sense that there has been, a lot of time and effort put into drawings over a long period of time. So again, I would finally kind of summarize this by saying your thoughts are drawings waiting to happen. And if this is kind of a bit of inception going on here, but this drawing is a representation of this quote. So this is me drawing the idea that your thoughts are drawings, just to prove the point, and I think that should end it. And I will start on the practice side of things. I think we can quickly, maybe Myrna wants to ask a question, or see if anyone else has any questions or if there's any questions unanswered we can ask, or I can carry on.
I mean, there is I'm not going to ask you anything right now, but there is a question, and I don't know, maybe we can leave that one for later. and that's by Sneha Sanu. I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name, which is, could you share your thoughts on specializing in sustainable architecture and the job prospects for the same in the UK? But yeah, I guess that could kind of follow up after your practice thing, and we can just kind of come back to that one. If you...
Yeah, I think you're right. So that was all very much to do with kind of, again, tied in with my experience and what I've learned from university. And I guess the main reason I think university is essential and what they do very well. But we're going to now, I think, move on to, what I've learned from practice, and it will perhaps show where the problems lie. But also one of the questions that people, someone very, I guess, reputable in the field said to me recently was, we've also got to ask the question of what is practice in 2021, and then we can get a better understanding of what is education and what education should be. So in these slides, I'll be going through the podcast episodes I've done and what I've actually learned from them. So just to kick things off, so for me and what I've learned from this whole process of being in practice and speaking to people who are leading in practice and on the fringe of architecture is that buildings are not at the precipice of architectural achievement. The most powerful contributions are ideas, visions, and innovations. And so in episode 1, I spoke to Shahid Salim, who is he's a historian and a professor at Bartlett and University of Westminster, and just an all-out very impressive guy, doing amazing things right now. So what I learned from this episode, speaking to Shahid, was architecture evolves in parallel with people's lives, their cultures, and their stories. We must never ignore history to inform the future. And so one thing very interesting about Shahid is, with an architectural background, Shahid is also delving into the world of publication. He's an author. He's contributing to the historical publications, and has done amazing work in both the architectural world, but also delving into writing. So the podcast in of itself is an expression of how architecture practice is changing, and these people are expressions of that. So one thing I learned from Adam Nathaniel Furman in episode 2 was object and identity are integral to our architectural thinking. We cannot escape ornament and aesthetics. This is another thing that I was talking about in my drawings and what university teaches you about, learning and trying to have that intuitive skill of understanding the value of ornament and aesthetics. These are things that can't be learned in one quick module or one quick course. And when we talk about the big elephant in the room, which we all know is why don't we learn more about construction and the architectural world of business and practice and the ins and outs of engineering and things like that, which is very common. I would come back to this, which is the importance and the balancing act that universities play with saying, what do we want to give them skills wise? And we'll come to that in a second when I share the data. Eric Wong on episode 3 taught me that questions create narrative. Never ignore details in drawing. Even depicting the direction that a blade of grass blows tells you something significant. So again, these are things where you have the freedom in university to be able to, dive deeply into this world of self-indulgence and create crazy drawings that, where you can spend hours and hours thinking about which way the blade of grass is going to blow. And to a lot of people, that can seem like a silly exercise. And we're going to bring up those concerns later. But at the same time, these are crucial skills that I have taken and have helped me on my journey. Episode 4 with Mandy Redvers-Rowe, who's this amazing actress and activist, and she's also blind and a massive proponent and player in talking about inclusive design. Taught me that inclusive design creates a world better for everyone, not just minorities. So this is a really important thing that I've learned from Mandy and my other engagements in this department is, when you think about creating an environment that is amplified for people who might be, for example, visually impaired, it instantly elevates the experience of people who are not visually impaired. So there's so many conversations to be had, and these things, again, you know, these are the broader aspects of the profession which you learn in university, and by speaking with people in the university, innovative circles of university. In episode 5 with Sean Griffiths, I learned that the process of letting go of intentionality is the truest way of creating original and innovative work. And Sean Griffiths is the famous co-founder of Fat Architects, who made big moves in the architectural world previously, and also he is, I believe, he's the professor of architecture at the University of Westminster as well. And this is the studio, by the way, which I was filming in Harrow. So I used all these facilities that I could find in university to create this environment, which pushed me in a direction slightly outside architecture as well. Episode 6, I spoke to Angela Brady, who's the ex-president of the RIBA, and I learned that you often underestimate your power to affect change and elevate your position. Speak out, take initiative, confidence works wonders. So amazing learnings from Angela. Arthur Mamumani from episode 7 taught me that once you know how much you don't know, you are on your way to knowing more. So be curious, patient, and trust the process. And again, Arthur is a studio leader at Westminster and all-round impressive professional. Episode 8 with environmental psychologist Eleanor Ratcliffe taught me that being scientific is not just for scientists, but we can also learn so much from our environment if we just listen, watch, and take notice. But sharing that knowledge is the key to progress. So with my kind of, you know, trajectory leaving university, I ended up trying to find all these impressive people to talk to. And I myself started to go off in this direction, which was pushing myself outside of the field of architecture, yet holding on to it in a very fundamental way. And in episode 9, I spoke to Anna Ulrich Anderson, who's an award-winning filmmaker, and said, she taught me that architecture is expressed through multiple art forms, not just buildings. Investigating spatial quality and meaning is a new territory, which is exciting, and also shows that, you know, the definition of architecture is so wide and is constantly changing and is evolving at the moment, as I've said multiple times. And university needs to be able to cater for that shift and for that expansion. And that's maybe why we don't see things like, you know, engineering and construction given more importance. That's not to say that they shouldn't be, and that's something we can't bring in. So episode 10 with Chris Hildry, we ended up doing more than one episode because he had so many amazing, wise things to say. Taught me that no one really needs an architect. Sorry to say something quite depressing, but nobody actually needs an architect today. And our roles are up to us to define for the future. And this is something I think which is fundamental to the whole ethos of today, and I guess my journey is, you know, practice is changing, and university is there to give you that environment for you to decide what architects will be doing in the future. Episode 11 with Ryan Willard, who also ended up doing more than one episode with, said that, you know, taught me that good communication is the route to selling. And architects, oh, and by the way, he is a business guru, Bartlett educated, ended up going and starting his own business consultation enterprise. And, you know, I haven't been able to really introduce all the guys, but all of these people are super impressive. Please check out the rest of my videos on my YouTube channel and the podcast to find out about them. But he taught me that architects are usually shit at selling and need to be able to see themselves and their true value from the outside. Marley Wieman, episode 12, taught me that before we try to be original, we need to look to the past to see what has been done and build from that. Episode 13 with Tabish Khan, who is an art critic, taught me that architects can have similar roles to artists to some degree. They make statements, and not all statements please all people. Contention is integral to good art. And this one was crazy because I didn't think I would ever get the chance to sit with the CEO and founder of Design. But he taught me that architects get lost in their bubble, and journalists blow bubbles. They play with bubbles. They look into bubbles, and attention follows those who are consistently good. But now I think let's go through the crucial elements. I think I've showed what I think to be the really positive aspects of university, but now I'm going to go through what I think university can improve. And again, I've taken loads of people's opinions from around the field with various polls and perspectives, and hopefully it will give us a good idea. So, quick statement from me is that we must prepare the current generation of architects and designers for roles yet to emerge by cultivating vision and versatility, as I've kind of alluded to this whole time. So I think versatility is the most important thing, because as I said, people think that there is not enough scope to learn the really pragmatic and practical things that university often ignores and practice often values. So I asked the question to many people: does architecture university prepare you for practice? And you can just see the results. The overwhelming response was no. So in another survey I did on LinkedIn, I asked the same question but gave more options, and I said, does architecture university prepare students for practice? And it was interesting to see a almost similar percentage of answers for not at all and kind of, but it needs improving. But what it showed is that the vast majority of students and professionals believe university needs to change, of which most people think it needs major changes. So I also asked the question, will you advise your kids, the next generation, to go to university or to go straight into work/apprenticeships? And it was quite interesting to see this, because almost 50-50 people saying university or work. And I think there's something really interesting here to kind of, for further research and further data to be collected. I think the FAF, the Future Architects Front, remember my good friend Charlie Edmonds, he's doing great work in this area, and I think people should definitely keep engaging and find all of FAF's great work to kind of investigate this even deeper, because we need to find out why. That, for example, why so many people say no, but still a lot of people want to go to university. And here is actually Future Architects Front surveys. So they asked, are you satisfied with your experience in architecture education? 39% said no, 25% said they're unsure, 35% said yes. So it's a bit more equal in their discussions, but it still shows that there's a big majority of people who are not satisfied. They asked, are you satisfied with university teaching staff and teaching methods? And again, it was an equal split between yes and no. They asked, did you face financial difficulty in university? And the slight majority said yes. They also asked, do you believe in your education? You believe your education was worth the cost of tuition? And this one's quite crazy, because 66% of people said no. Only 19% said yes. They asked, do you believe that your university valued your physical and mental health? And this is, I think, one of the biggest elephants in the room, which, again, 60% said no. Another question was, do you believe that your university valued equity, diversity, and inclusion? And interestingly, most of the people said yes. Another one was, would you encourage a friend or relative to study architecture? 50% said no, and only 25% said yes. And then they asked, if you have already graduated, did you feel supported by a university while working in architectural practice? And an overwhelming majority said no. But the biggest overwhelming majority was in the, do you believe architectural education needs to change? And 92% said yes. So this seems to match my data as well. And here are some of the responses by people, and some of you who I think might be watching this will be able to see your answers. But when I asked why people said no, it doesn't prepare you, some of the answers were, for example, nowadays it becomes a system of training slaves. One person said practice involves very little design, university involves little else. So you can see this discrepancy between people feeling the need to bring in construction knowledge and practical knowledge and how the profession actually works and what the role of architects today are, and not always thinking about the future and innovation, but how do you facilitate people to go out into the working world today and feel confident and comfortable. Someone else said we talk about sustainability all the time in university, whereas we hardly see it in practice. So I think this is another really big thing with university, where it can sometimes be a bit idealistic and teach people about, how the world is there for you to change and, your utopia is out there somewhere. But the reality of the real world and the working world is much different. Someone else said, out of touch, naive, arrogant tutors. It's a bit of a sensitive topic, but again, it shows that there are various levels to which university can change, not just in the syllabus and in the modules, but also in the culture and the kind of the way the staff kind of relay information and teach things. But an interesting one, if you see the top left, someone said that university is not meant to prepare you for practice, that it's not a trade school. So if you allow practice to define education, it stifles innovation. So this one leans much more towards, I guess, my perspective as well, which is, there is a fine balance between trying to figure out, should university try to tone down some of the innovative and future perspective kind of architectural vision, or should it really embrace it, or should it start to bring in all of these pragmatic things? I think obviously the answer is a balance, and we need to address that balance more seriously now. There's so many, I'll leave this up for a couple of seconds for you to read, but there's so many things that people were saying, and I got so many overwhelming responses that it was hard to bring in everyone's responses. But this video will stay up. You can pause it later and look through these answers. But the overwhelming summary of this is people want to learn the practical skills to take into practice, so that they don't feel so that they can feel confident to say, I know how to deliver a building. You can see some of the green boxes that start to appear from people's responses, which start to show some of the solutions. So a part of this data collection that I was doing was actually to bring in people into the process and say, look, what should we do to improve? And it's amazing to see so many responses of people suggesting things. So one person said, make internships mandatory. Someone said, be relevant to current industry and keep updating. Someone says, help students to get internships or work experience for a year as part of a degree. And we see loads of universities starting to think about this, and some unis actually doing it right now. More field practice. Again, the same thing is coming up with more support to practice in real life, in real business life. So many solutions here. You guys are amazing, because so many people here really giving their suggestions, and the whole point of this presentation, just so for me to reiterate, is I was not going to come here and give you an answer. That was never going to be the case. I was going to explain my perspective, and I was going to try to bring forward as many people's perspective as I could, as hard as it has been to try to, even say all this is, but what we're seeing here is so many people wanting change, and so many people ready to suggest really realistic solutions. For example, bringing in more collaborative projects, imply realistic briefs, more construction site visits, add more practical work to prepare you for post-uni life, for example, like real life scenarios. have more tutors who are practicing architects rather than academic visionaries. So again, this video will be up on the YouTube channel for you to see later, and you can pause and look through all of these overwhelming responses of solutions. Even more. It's crazy. It's so many responses. So thank you to all of you who responded. Coming to the end now, we can take the presentation off. I think that leaves it now to the audience. If anyone has any questions, also Myrna, I know you wanted to come in with some questions. I'm a bit all spoken out. I feel like I've been speaking. Well, I have been speaking for like an hour, so I think you can take it from here. Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Hamza. This was absolutely amazing, and you've done so much work for the university, basically, kind of collecting all of these really important, really kind of informative insights. That, you know, this is one of the reasons why we are having this conversation, as I think that it's very clear at a university level, particularly when it comes to architectural education. And this is something that, you know, even Royal Institute of British Architects have been discussing. It's, you know, the question of like, how do we change? It's not even a question whether we need to change. It's the question of how do we change? And I think that's why today's conversation and the polls that you did on your Instagram are extremely valuable, and should be kind of, you know, I will definitely make sure that I sort of push forward into and feed this into kind of the faculty and the academic community. Just kind of few things that I sort of observed through through what you've been talking about. So I guess for you, as you said at the very beginning, your trajectory is maybe not the kind of the most standard one. So you had a very specific route into architecture, and the university perhaps was not the thing that you had in mind from the start, but it was something that was not necessarily imposed on you, but you were kind of maybe pushed into it. And then it turned out to actually be the kind of the best thing for you. Whereas for some other people, it might seem like a most natural route, and then they realize perhaps I made a mistake. So there are always kind of different ways in which you can play out. But what I guess is what could be kind of summed up from the first part of your presentation is that there is some merit in architectural education, university education, and that it does provide you with certain skills that may be used if you're almost like if you're creative enough, and if you're willing to step outside of the box. Actually, it can give you a lot of different opportunities, because it kind of gives you, as you said, some kind of not just the skills, but also freedom to envisage things, to kind of, you know, be brave with your visions, basically. On the other hand, you know, as we had this conversation preparing for this event, not everyone necessarily wants to do that. You know, not everyone necessarily wants to. So people maybe just want to have a proper job in the practice and just carry on. And here is where these questions kind of, you know, bounce back, and we're like, does it really prepare you for practice? And then, you know, it seems like this is where the university seems to be not exactly like, you know, gliding through. So I guess my question to you would be, and you've kind of already started answering this, but what is your sort of vision in terms of like, what would you have wanted to have more of while you were studying? Where did you feel the lack? Or now that you're working, when you kind of look back at the your, you know, educational trajectory, what do you think would have been good to have more of or less of, you know? So perhaps something like that we can start with. And then obviously there's a lot of I mean, there's one I'm just going to sort of quickly flag up. Sana Tabassum, sorry, said something which I think she asked a question in response to the question that we asked, which was
we're curious to know whether you guys think that the architectural education at universities could potentially become obsolete in the future, and that we'll primarily rely on apprenticeships. So Sana's response to that was, I think that depends on how practices evolve too, and if they start to facilitate apprenticeships, then of course, but most require the 2.1 or above, which is the only option for the students. So I guess another thing is kind of this link to the practice, and do you see that these two need to really kind of correspond one with another and work in conjunction?
With the apprenticeships, it's a difficult one, because I think Sana's right. Like, of course it depends on how apprenticeships evolve. Practices evolve, and at the same time, like a 2-1 being a requirement for apprenticeships. Part of me says, like, look, of course there needs to be a place for everyone to jump onto the working ladder at every point, but we can't help but deny the fact that at the end of the day, it's the people who do well who are going to get the jobs first. I think the important thing is that universities need to think about, practices need to think about ways of facilitating people on all spectrums of the ladder, because at the end of the day, grades are grades. Someone could get a 2.2 or someone could fail. I almost failed my first year, and it's not necessarily indicative of how good somebody is at the said field or the practice. It sometimes can just show a lack of motivation or some unforeseen circumstance, and there are things in place to try and minimize those anomalies, if you like. But I think Sana's right in the sense that there's only so much the current infrastructure of practices can cater towards, and that's why I think it's really important to realize that university gives you this broad set of skills, and you could graduate with a 2.2, you could graduate with a 2.2, not even a 2.1, yet your portfolio is somewhat really well suited for a particular job that might be outside of traditional architecture. Your portfolio, maybe you did these crazy maybe you've got a 2.2 in university, or you've maybe did, I don't know how the grading systems work, to be honest, in all honesty, but if you did worse than that, then maybe you did that because you took a risk in your course. And I took risks in, for example, my 4th year that didn't necessarily give me the grade I wanted, but those risks, university gave you the freedom to take those risks. And let's say you did these crazy fine art paintings instead of finished sectional drawings and elevations, but you took those fine art paintings and your 2.2, and you went to a creative graphic design studio and you sent them your portfolio, and they were like, whoa, this is an amazing portfolio. You got 2 years or 3 years or 5 years in university to do whatever you wanted, to go down whatever trajectory you wanted. It's risky. It is a risky thing to have this flexibility. But I think if we retain that flexibility, then there is more options and there is more opportunities for people as well. So I think with Sana's contention, I think she's completely right. But I think the flexibility of what university currently provides favors more opportunities than less opportunities. But to answer the questions that you were asking previously, like what my position is on this, it's difficult to summarize that. I've just spent an hour trying to just put the issues out there and some solutions. I don't think there's one way of summarizing what the solution could be. I think the fact that this conversation is going on, and the fact there are people listening, and the fact that this is a long conversation is the most important thing. The fact that people are doing data studies and polls is so important. We're going to find out. But one thing I think is quite clear is there needs to be a more well-balanced course structure, where the course structure starts to bring in perhaps more flexibility of people who could decide to specify their focus on things that are more traditional practice. I think that's the personally, I think that's the way to go. I think you need to retain your flexibility, but give people the option to say, okay, I'm going to go into this studio at Masters that really, really emphasizes the built working world. You know, BIM, talks more about BIM, talks more about starting an architectural practice, you know, in today's climate. Or that doesn't have to be a separate studio, but it becomes a core learning module, which I know universities already do, but maybe that could become more of a frontline thing in university, where you make sure that there is a basic understanding being kind of taught to the students about them understanding the ins and out of practice, almost like a part 3 and part 2 combined. You know, maybe it's as drastic as that. Maybe part 3 is somehow integrated into the first year of Masters. I don't know. I think there are various schools that are doing pretty cool things with apprenticeships. I think that is a very simple way to get people in, to directly link practices in with the school and give people direct experience that way. So yeah, I think my answer is a bit all over the place, but at the same time, I think fundamentally it's about bringing balance back in, bringing in the pragmatism, and just kind of realigning the focus. I think university education hasn't had a shake-up recently. It hasn't had a reset of like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board, guys, and think about how education is, overall. Some universities that have emerged recently, I think, have done that more explicitly. But I think we're in this period now where, the older universities who've had hundreds of years of time already, they'll be taking more initiative now. So Sana's saying, but it's interesting that even through the polls, students clearly want an adaptable education. Skills aren't just limited to drawings, concepts, and history, in my opinion. Soft skills are lifelong.
There's more, yeah.
University doesn't teach you how to present crits, how a practice works as a business. Many students want to open their own firms, or even how to position yourself as a professional industry. Yeah, exactly. I think one easy thing is to look at content creators right now. And, I've been called a content, and I am a content creator, but, these people who have come into the social media field, Sana Tabassum is one of them at To Scale. Thomas Roundtree, who's with us, is one of them. Charlie Edmonds at FAF, all these people doing amazing things. Alvin Zhu, follow all these people, and look at what they're doing. If you look at what they're doing, what we are all doing is filling in the gaps. So you could easily go there and just see, what is being done by these people, and those things could maybe then. I mean, one thing I'll be honest, I'll reveal it. I'm working on is by approaching universities and saying, look, why don't you bring people like me or other people in who've spent years doing, handing out content and education and journey and discovery online, and bring them in to give workshops. And then you don't need to do maybe massively drastic things, but the gaps that education doesn't address, these people can come in as kind of workshop mentors and whatnot. And at the same time, the same should be done, I think, more explicitly with the professionals in practice. But this is the thing; it's an open arena. Personally, I feel architect school helps me imagine, understand my visions better, communicate them, and be creative and innovative. So this is it, Zakaria. He says, to be trained on how to navigate the real world as we try to turn our visions into reality would be a big improvement from the university's side, since as architects we are more entrepreneurial. Exactly. I think Zakaria is saying the same thing. We need to bring the balance back in. University does things extremely well, and I think a lot of people will travel all over the world from different countries to come to, from my experience, to come to the UK to practice, to study, because the UK, and I know other places too, we saw an international response on the polls, but certain universities give more emphasis to giving people that freedom to do literally anything you want, and there's something quite crazy and exciting about that. And that's how I felt. When I started university, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to follow the trajectory that everyone else is going down, because I have the freedom to do what I want. So, yeah.
I was just going to jump in on that and say, kind of based on what we've seen, the responses, and I can see there's more in the comments now from Sumia and Sana, and people complaining, and these are very valid concerns. Somebody who's kind of doesn't teach you from a business perspective, and I guess that's something that can be integrated. I mean, I think in architecture schools we have to start with teaching the architecture skills first in the kind of on the undergraduate level, but later on could be perhaps more options to integrate for those who want to open up, open their own practices or just kind of practice as sole practitioners. There should be, because that's more part 3 kind of, and I guess what you were saying, Hamza, perhaps it's the question of like, how do you integrate part 2 and part 3 in some ways, or some parts of like part 3 migrating into part 2 to make the those who finish their diplomas actually capable of running the business side of architecture. And I think that's something that really needs to, which kind of ties in with the question and an issue that I'm sure is an overwhelming issue, is the length of the course itself.
Not just the length of the course, the money that we have to spend.
Exactly, which
yeah. What's crazy is that we come into architecture education with the fees already being increased, and then on top of that we have to then pay all these crazy university fees for printing, for all the bureaucratic crap like PEDRs, and there's value to this, but all these things need a shake up, and they need a rethinking. And it's not, again, for anybody who came here for answers and for one answer, I apologize, you're not going to get that. This is meant to be a thought out loud session, and I'm glad it was. And Mamouna says universities do provide RIBA mentorship, however it's extremely bite-sized and one cannot explore or understand the discrepancies in education and work. Our entire degree is orchestrated around self-teaching, using external content, for example, YouTube, which we're on right now. Mamouna, exactly. This is it. So, everything is in flux at the moment. But I think the next step is for these conversations to be heard. And again, applaud, hats off to Westminster for hosting something like this, where all these contentions can be voiced. I think it needs to keep happening. I think there needs to be incremental changes that start happening from the ground up. And I always say this, but I think universities need to start to look at the younger people in the industry who are doing big things or who are making changes, and see and realize that they've naturally ended up in those roles because of what perhaps traditional systems were not catering to. And as Mamouna said, one thing I also notice is universities don't have a very strong social media presence, and it's only recently that these things have started to become more cracked onto. But there's so many things that are going to be evolving now that I'm actually quite excited.
No, absolutely. I think I was going to flag up this because I think this is really important as well, Sana's comment. And also, since many BAME people in this industry don't actually make it to part 3, it deters them from learning about those things, since qualifying is such a long process. And I think this is something that really needs to be flagged up. I mean, I think for University of Westminster, considering the kind of the very high percentage of Black, Asian, minority ethnic students, this really needs to be at the kind of top of the agenda in many ways, and particularly on the kind of a BA level, because Westminster directly reflects, it's primarily the London students that do attend the BA courses, and it directly reflects the kind of the demographics of London. And I think it's a big question. It's an important question. It's been raised, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about practice, and the kind of how practices need to evolve as well. And practicing architecture has been for too long kind of confined to very rigid, very specific kind of class, race in many ways, and these are kind of slowly, and gender, of course, slowly breaking down, but we're still at the very kind of beginnings. And I think people like, like yourself, these younger generations, for instance, I mean, thinking about the current practitioners who came out of the University of Westminster, obviously Muslim Women in Architecture as a collective who's doing a lot of work at the moment. And I believe that we really need to kind of start bringing you guys back into this conversation, and your presence within educational structures is also going to be a kind of, organically, it's going to instigate change, because also you are already practicing in a different way. You are already connecting with each other, and kind of, these kind of hierarchical structures of power are already coming down. There's a lot more collectives. You're more organically linking with each other. And I think that that's going to have to translate into teaching in some ways. And, it's going to have to change the curriculum. We are at the minute steps at the moment, obviously, but it's an important, conversations like this, and hopefully, engagements with you guys further down the line are going to be helping the university, because university clearly needs, as you said, we all need, like, university education needs there's a clear need for some kind of a shake-up. And so this is, at least, I mean, I speak as someone who's kind of inside the university, but also, like, this is my personal point of view. I teach in other places as well, and I see how things work. So it's a complex structure that's already in place, as all structures that have been in place for a very long time and have ossified in many ways. It's not going to be easy to dismantle it, but as is the case, as we said, within the Royal Institute of British Architects, where already these conversations are also happening, or should be happening in many ways, both around the gender. You yourself basically spoke to Angela Brady, who talked a lot, from what I know, she did explain about her role in kind of, bringing awareness of, like, a women's position in kind of in practicing architecture. And that's what she saw her role was when she was the president. And it kind of revealed a lot of problems and inequalities. So I think this is, that's kind of something that I think is going to be very, very important, that you guys are around, and that we are having not just these conversations, because I really don't think that having conversation is in itself enough, but it's a starting point for hopefully more integration, more engagement, and more young voices, which will actually instigate change. Younger tutors as well, which are, like I said, bringing a different type of maybe more collaborative practices back into the design studios, and perhaps proposing different briefs, perhaps working with different references, so these are all going to be quite, I think, important things. I don't know, I'm happy to hear what the audience thinks, if they want to challenge me on this, or if they agree or disagree, or you, Hamza, as well. What do you think?
No, I don't think you can challenge that, really. I think at the end of the day, my focus is on, when it comes to people, and we talk about the emotional needs of students as well. I think that's something we haven't talked about a lot. It's definitely in the responses of the culture in university that essentially makes students feel this pressure to, be constantly productive, quote unquote, and to be constantly working towards some sort of outcome. And that can become a bit unhealthy, very unhealthy at times, when people will do all-nighters, and they'll have this, this really difficult relationship with the rest of the people in the studio. And I think it's the tutors who play the really important role in I think tutors need to be talked about more explicitly. We talk about university, but who are we talking about at university? Yes, there are the people, heads of school, and yes, there are the people organizing and curating studios, like yourself, Myrna. But the tutors are the guys on the ground. They're the people who are really inspiring and helping students, sometimes demotivating and not helping students. So I think if there's anything I want to, like, say to this, and with the whole conversation of diversity and all of that, it's, if you're bringing in tutors and you keep having a refresh, and I think inevitably that happens, it's critical, it's crucial to bring in people who are at the forefront of where the innovation is happening or where the changes are happening. But also, I think it's important for people to remember that we need organizations, we need systems, we need to work with the the institutions which we believe are doing not a great job in certain things. We need to work with them. We can't be these kind of anarchists, in my opinion, and try to destroy stuff. We need to work with them. Our voices are being heard, which is great. And I think we're on to some really amazing kind of evolution here. And I think if I was starting university now, for anyone who is going into university, I'd be so hopeful to know that you now have the potential to do whatever you want. University gives you that flexibility. And I'll tell you this, if you're someone who says, you know what, I'm looking forward to, but I'm dreading not being able to learn the practical elements of construction and BIM, and I'm dreading to go into practice and not know how the business runs, and I'm dreading to know, how the working life of a job of an architect works, I would say, okay, you can find that information now online. There are people, content creators, social media personalities, so many YouTube videos, so many books, so many other resources out there now, where I think you can go and grab those, bring them into your education, bring them into your learning. And, you have you even have the flexibility to make your entire course about those things if you want to focus on that. So I will always advocate for a flexible university curriculum. Others might not, but from my personal perspective, I think this conversation is needed. I think there needs to be more discussions, there needs to be roundtables, there need to be people with experience, with 30, 40 years experience in education, to come and speak to people who are just coming out of education, and there need to be face-to-face discussions of how they can improve it. And hopefully this is part of that process. And I think, that's my main takeaway here.
Great. Toxic all-nighters is romanticized, and it is seen as the core essence of architecture. If one is not working day and night in the studio, you're immediately labeled as a failure and antisocial. I mean, this has been a problem for generations. And I have no answer to this, but as someone who's been through this myself, and have one of the reasons I removed myself eventually from practice was precisely because it was I found it way too toxic for all kinds of reasons. So it's I can completely sympathize with this, but I don't know. Perhaps this is where the younger generations really need to step up the game in terms of refusing once you're out of the university. And if you really start setting up your own practices, perhaps it should be based more around care. I don't know. It's a difficult one, because of course the market also in many ways dictates the way we work. So I think it's kind of a system really does need
to be honest. Yeah. To be honest, I think people are luckier now than I guess people like me were back. If you're starting university now, I think you're lucky, because as I said, these external resources that you have, YouTubers, content creators, people sharing their journeys, that they're vlogging. I'm about to start a series myself on part 3. I'll be sharing the ins and outs of the part 3 education, demystifying all of that on my YouTube. So these things are there for you to go and find, and I think you need to get fully involved into the architectural community on social media, online, and you will learn by all the people who are on these platforms, by all the people who are speaking out on social media and trying to relay information back to people. And I could name so many of them, but just go and find them on Instagram. Find us. You'll be able to do it. Who are trying to get across the message of how you can improve. And one thing that always comes up is all-nighters don't get you anywhere. I spoke to Eric Wong in episode 3 of my podcast, who's a multiple medal award-winning student. You couldn't ask for a better or a more higher achieving student than him. And he only ever did one all-nighter his entire university. And what it shows is if you can kind of focus on efficiency, focus on productivity in a healthy sense, real productivity, and try to understand and educate yourself on these wider things about learning, which a side point is I think tutors need to be taking more initiative as well on teaching students how to have a healthy studio life. But I think all these things are out there. We need to be able to find them. And I think for universities to be able to initiate this change, they need to start seriously bringing in people now. But I think these things are starting to happen. So yeah, I think some people are a bit pessimistic here, saying that I honestly don't think real change will come into effect for a while because we're only now having this conversation. I think, yeah, to some degree that's true, but there are schools right now who have a completely experimental curriculum. For example, the London School of Architecture, who that is a massive change to the educational system that's happened many years ago. So change is definitely happening, and I think we are part of the change in of ourselves. The people who are trying to add information and add knowledge to the discourse online. I know that Sana's been definitely the VIP commenter today, saying, I think it's a poor reflection on the industry that students are learning more from each other, rather than from institutions. The archi community is finally banding together. Yeah, and the fact that we are all coming together, and the fact that we are all, we have created this force, and it's weird to say this, but if you think about the forces that are acting on architecture right now, and hopefully will be acting in the future, they're all connected. I work closely with Charlie Edmonds at Future Architects Front, who's probably created a massive, arguably a very big shift today, with RBA and all the, the work they've been doing. Adam Nathaniel Furman, who brought up the internship controversy. Again, we're all kind of connected. And I think other people are doing amazing things today as well. Sana, who's the VIP commenter, that is doing amazing things. And all sorts of other people that I've talked about from around the world, in Dubai as well, like Faisal, who I work with. All these people are doing things around the world, and they're all interconnected. And I think the fact that social media has enabled us and has activated us is a massively positive thing. And I think that is is already causing universities to listen and institutions to listen. So I would be hopeful. I would be positive about the changes.
Yeah.
So
we're just going back to earlier questions. Yeah. So this is Sneha Sanu. Hi, could you share your thoughts on specializing in sustainable architecture and the job prospects for the same in the UK? I mean, I can start with this one just by saying that, I'm sure this is, considering the kind of moment we live in terms of, the massive issues with climate change or climate crisis that we have, reached and, are reaching at an accelerated rate now. I think this is going to be probably the only way we can practice in the future. And so this is going to be highly relevant. I know that the University of Westminster has organized what is known as a climate crisis task force, which kind of grows across the university, but they will have sort of a kind of an advisory body which will in many ways challenge the architectural curriculum, and will basically try and integrate in the curriculum more and more ways of working with the current and the kind of projected condition of climate change. I mean, I don't know. Sorry, the name. Let me just pronounce it.
I think it's Sneha.
Sneha, yeah. So I don't know if you are looking for an master's degree University of Westminster has a master's degree in architecture and environmental design, which is probably the closest. I'll share the these there's climate action task force, and as Jack was just correcting me now. Thank you, Jack. So there are kind of courses at the moment, and I'm sure that there will be, in terms of job prospects. You're most likely going to be, indispensable in many ways in the years to come. And this is kind of, once again, we're returning to the question of, like, that there are so many forces out there that are forcing the practices to change the way in which they are practiced, both kind of in terms of like natural disaster issues that we're facing to more kind of social issues that are pressing. So, and I think it will have to be reflected on education as well. So I'll just share.
I think to answer the question, can I see it again quickly? Sorry. That Sneha asked. I hope we're saying your name right. So on specializing in sustainable architecture and the job prospects of the same in the UK. I think, look, one, in terms of specializing in something like sustainable architecture, I think it's great that you're thinking like that. I like the fact that you're thinking about specializing, because I think at university you should start to think about maybe what interests you. I say that with slight maybe hypocrisy in the fact that I wasn't like, okay, I want to really focus on this aspect of architecture. I was very much focused on my outside activities and at the same time really understanding the processes of drawing and why drawing was so valuable. And that's the reason why my beginning half of the presentation was all about drawing. So that's something maybe what I've specialized in, if anything. But something like this is great. So with somebody who is asking about sustainable architecture, you could go into university, and it's amazing to hear what Amir and I say, that there is a master's course dedicated to that. But I would say, even if you didn't want to go into that course and you did a general course in Masters of Architecture, you could specialize in that just by your own intention, by the mere fact of you choosing what projects to tackle, choosing your brief, choosing your studio. The studio choices at Westminster are amazing, I must say, because you've got some of these really renowned tutors who are doing incredible things outside of the academia in the professional world, and they themselves bring their specialisms. So I think Arthur Mamumani is, for example, a master's tutor, and he teaches things about specializing in like biophilic design and parametric thinking with regards to taking inspiration from nature. There's various other studios that focus strictly on climate action as well. So I think when you go to your induction, I don't know if it's already happened, or when you go to the studio presentations, listen carefully and figure out where you think you could fit in. One quick piece of advice I would give to people at Westminster is that first year of masters is ungraded. So it's amazing that you get that year to just be even more flexible. I think you should take a risk, try to explore something you wouldn't necessarily want to explore, other times, and then in your fifth year really specialize. So my answer to Sneha is, you can easily specialize in that just by your own actions in university, and joining university groups and joining university initiatives internally and externally. Take your initiative, create content about it, and you will, if you spend a year creating content about what you've learned about sustainability, you will be somewhat of a specialist after. That then gets put in your portfolio, in your CV. People will see that, and you'll get great jobs. In your second part of your question, which is job prospects, this will help you in your job prospects. Where you brand yourself and create content, I think is an integral part of the student experience now. I think people need to be clocking onto that. And in terms of the UK, you can come into a practice as a sustainability specialist. You can come on into a practice. For example, at Make Architects, where I work, we have qualified architects there, but they specialize in sustainability and they head those departments, and they get paid, maybe a little bit more because they take on more responsibility. So there's so much flexibility in that sense as well. There was a question about drawing. If we quickly answer that. and maybe bring it to an end soon. Was there a question about drawing that we can beam up? I think it was Zachariah. Any resources you would suggest to improve architectural drawings? Yeah, my YouTube channel. Without embarrassment, yeah, please watch my videos. I spend a lot of time and a lot of effort,
Absolutely.
putting a lot of dedicated kind of efforts into creating content to help people elevate their drawings. And my Instagram, I'm constantly putting out new drawings. One thing you'll notice on my Instagram is I hardly ever stick to a particular style of drawing, because my aim is to just get as much understanding of experimental drawing methods and always explore new methods. I love drawing. So yeah, I would highly recommend my content for that. But at the same time, there's amazing books that I've recently discovered, which I will, one really amazing book, I can't say that, I don't even remember the bloody title. It's on my bedside table. You know what? I'm going to add it to the comments, so come back to this video and I'll make a full list of books I recommend. Another thing I would also recommend actually is to look at exhibitions, old historical exhibitions, for example, that are archived by the RIBA on drawings. Just to get an understanding of the history of drawings is a fascinating thing. So resources for drawings, primarily look at my content. Yeah, it's been a long chat today.
Yeah,
I hope some of that
absolutely.
was useful.
Let's see. Are there any other questions? There doesn't seem to be. All comments. Anyone would like bring something up or ask something? Doesn't seem like. Let's see. Otherwise, we can start. If there is nothing burning, we can start maybe wrapping it up soon. Let's see. Give it another minute. Hamza, you must be exhausted at this point.
Yeah, I really need water. So yeah, no, I think it's been useful. I think, as I said, it might have seemed all over the place, and I apologize for that. I think my intention with this was to just make sure that, as many ideas and thoughts are being put out there, at the same time explaining why my perspective is the way it is, and also why I thought, university was really valuable to me. And that's why the whole initial part of this event discussion was, drawings. And I think, one thing I haven't talked too deeply about here, but is all over my YouTube channel, is, the learnings from drawings and how that actually can prepare you for practice, and how actually getting onto social media and sharing your journey, and, I think, even sharing your drawings on social media will teach you a little bit about producing fast-paced visual content for a very demanding audience. And that is actually very similar to actually how work in the real world works. You need to produce things quickly. But at the same time, I would just also reiterate to people, please don't hesitate to contact me. Find me on Instagram. I usually reply to most people, as long as most people, yeah. And any questions, any guidance you need, I'm happy to help. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Hamza. This was absolutely amazing and super informative and super valuable. I hope that our audience has gotten out of it. I'm sure they have actually a lot. And I guess in a way, just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, it sounds to me like, and based on that poll by Future Architects Front as well, it seems that there's still people who are in favor of university education. It's just a question of what kind of university education are we talking about. So it's not like let's cancel universities. It's more like, okay, there is merit in what universities have to offer, but we need to understand that we live in a precipice of change, and that this really needs to that the kind of universities need to learn to respond to this change as well. So more flexibility is needed, more options, also for people who might be more suited for traditional trajectory, but also those who are who feel more comfortable being kind of, more open-ended and perhaps finding their own way that is more suitable for their personality, for their skills, and so on. So there definitely needs to be kind of step outside of this kind of ossified sort of old school way of teaching. It needs to be kind of move into something at least kind of dual trajectory, and then perhaps from there we can kind of branch out to something.
And critical to my ethos. Conversation, long form conversation. It's so valuable to be able to sit down for 2 hours and talk, because this is going to be used as research material maybe one day. People will go and analyze what's been said. So I think honestly universities also need to invite more conversation, create the infrastructure to have people come and pose big questions like this. So again, hats off to Westminster for doing this. I hope other universities follow suit, and they also bring in young people, bring in people who are, doing things, changing things. And also every student's voice is so valuable. Some of the suggestions we were getting from people who aren't crazy active on social media, but their opinions are incredibly useful. So there needs to be this arena that university create.
Oh God. Is this, are we down now? I think so. Let's see what Jack says. Hamza will be back shortly. Okay. Thank you, Jack. Jack has been, okay, great.
Nice banner, Jack. That was it, yeah. The conversation is needed.
Great. Well, great to have you back in the conversation, Hamza, just for these last couple of minutes. But thank you, everyone, so much for being here, for contributing, for voicing your opinions. Hopefully there'll be more of these. This is just the beginning. And Hamza, as always, brilliant work. Thank you so much. And go and enjoy the rest of the relatively sunny evening that we're having.
It's the weekend, Friday.
It's the weekend, yeah. Thank you, guys. And
anyone starting Westminster, get excited, because you can do whatever you want. Honestly, you can do whatever you want. And if you
what he's saying in this way.
And if you have any issues, any support, any motivation, send me a text, send me a message. Sorry to interrupt.
No, great. Thank you so much. And shout out to Jack, who's been amazing for emceeing this whole thing. Thank you, Jack. And have a good night, guys. Bye.